Now, I've been a Green Party member for over a year now. I'm on the left wing of the Green Party, as you might be able to tell from the kind of content that I put out. And if you're on the left wing of the Green Party, you're probably somebody who supports Zack Polanski, who's running to be the leader of the Green Party. He's been going pretty viral. He's got lots of slots on TV recently, and I've seen loads of people saying that they like the cut of his jib, that they are interested in the things that he has to say and that he's speaking to people's issues, which is good. I think that this early level of interest in his campaign should hopefully pay dividends in the long run. Now, in his media round that he's been doing over the last couple of weeks, a few days ago he was on the Jeremy Vine show to debate Reem Ibrahim on a whole host of issues. For people who don't know, Reem Ibrahim is a spokesperson for the Institute of Economic Affairs, a hard right think tank backed by incredibly shady figures who I couldn't possibly comment on. And her opinions basically suck on everything. She's awful. She has terrible opinions about everything. It's almost like she's being paid to have those opinions. I couldn't possibly comment on that either. Anyway, Zack and her came to blows over a number of issues. Let's have a watch and see what they had to say.
Well, Zack, thank you for coming in. First time on the show, deputy leader of the Green Party and running for the leadership. So what made you decide to do that?
I think there's a huge space in British politics where the Conservatives utterly failed this country and people voted Labour expecting change. But actually they're getting more of the same, whether it's for cuts to winter fuel payments, whether it's to pensioners or the waspy women. I think there's a space in British politics for a politician and a party to say this country needs bold leadership, we need radical change. And actually people are sick of the two old parties.
I just wonder if you look around at the other green organisations, Just Stop Oil, get a lot of attention. There's a group called PETA. Did you see this thing that they had a robot cow that started prancing around? We can see it, right? So they put what it does is it moves. It's called Charlie XC Cow.
Oh, that's brilliant. Like the singer.
Don't get anything past Reem Ibrahim, do you? Nothing comes past her. Oh, it's like the singer. Yes, Reem. It's like the singer, Charlie XCX. Yes, that's how that works. Interesting that he's talking about radical solutions to all of the problems that are facing the country. That we need to have a change in our economic and social model to be able to create a better society for everyone. And Jeremy Vine is like, but have you considered PETA have a robot cow? It shows you how seriously these people take politics, really. And on top of this, trying to compare the actions of Just Stop Oil to the political wing of the environmental movement, which is the Green Party, it fundamentally misunderstands the point in that the policy is supposed to be radical, the change, that the system that we move to has to be radically different from the current system to fix the myriad crises that our country and our economy is currently going through. It's not the action that you take that's radical, it's the end goal that is radical, right? So he's misunderstanding what he means by radical here by comparing it to the kind of things that Just Stop Oil do and Peter's robot cow.
Yeah.
If it detects you're wearing real leather. Now, why isn't the Green Party doing this stuff?
Because they're a political party trying to get elected and not a protest group trying to gain attention. And there are better ways of gaining attention than robot cows and of spraying Stonehenge orange, which is speaking to people's concerns by being sincere and down to earth and thinking about the important things that affect people's lives. And again, he's pigeonholing Zack Polanski and the Green Party's position here as being purely around the idea of climate change and of environmentalism. And of course, we have a policy prospectus for the whole of the economy. We have a whole political ideology that never gets talked about because people pigeonhole us as being a single issue party when we just aren't.
I mean, this is impressive. It definitely gets us talking. I think also for the Green Party, the big thing is everyone knows we care about the environment, but something I'm really, really keen for people to know is we've got loads of policies on the National Health Service, to making sure we're building council housing, to making sure that we're dealing with the cost of living.
But my point about Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion and so on is that they seem more radical.
Right.
They do. I mean, okay.
Again, radical methods, but not radical outcomes. I mean, semi-radical outcomes, but the outcomes is what's important. That's what the Green Party is there to agitate for through the political process rather than through direct action.
Not suggesting you want to be throwing tomato soup at a Van Gogh or whatever, but they're the ones who get the headlines.
So this is a big part of my campaign that people can find out about at backzack.com, which is essentially about talking about bold leadership. And part of that is cutting through to the media. So I'm really happy to be on your show today because I think very often people haven't heard from Green Party politicians.
Yeah.
And I think knowing that we've got this whole range of policies and things we care about, and actually we're getting elected in record numbers. We've just in the last 8 local elections, we're the only party that have made net gains. So I'm really excited for the future of the Green Party and I'm excited to hopefully be leader.
Okay.
Other than reform.
Well, but Reform haven't been a party for the entirety of those 8 years, right? They've only been a party since 2020. Whereas the Greens have made increases in their seats for the last 8 years, which is before Reform UK were even a thing.
They also made net gains.
And not in the last 8 years.
Yeah,
so
I think there's something statistical going on there, but we won't delve too deeply.
So that's a good intro into the kind of things that Zack is talking about, reaching people where they are, talking about the core bread and butter issues that affect everyone's everyday lives, rather than looking like a single issue environmentalist protest group, which has put a cap on the political reach of the Green Party because people don't feel like we have policies that help their everyday lives. And this happens every time you talk to people. They say, oh, you only care about Gaza, you only care about the environment, you only care about nature. And I'm like, no, we have a prospectus for government that is full of issues like child poverty, like the cost of living crisis, like the NHS crisis that we have political solutions for, and we are not just a single issue party, right? So it's important to get the message out there. Now, that was obviously very friendly in terms of the interaction between Zack and Reem there. Let's see what happened when they had a bit of a bigger disagreement. So the second clip we've got here is Zack and Reem debating the merits of water nationalisation, given the failure of Thames Water, the falling through of the deal with KKR, and the increased debt burden and increased bills for consumers. Zack is arguing that it is now the correct time to nationalise Thames Water, and he is correct. Let's see what Reem Ibrahim has to say.
The point is, privatisation works when people, consumers, are able to choose. People don't have a choice. The government have still made that choice for
Zack,
them.
there's still...
No, the industry has made the choice for them because it's a natural monopoly. What, you're going to have every individual water company have different pipes to each house? This isn't going to work, Reem. Again, she's arguing that, well, we need more privatisation in a system which has already been privatised more than any other country in the world, including Pinochet's Chile, still privatised less water than we did. And that is the problem, is there is no market mechanism in a natural monopoly.
It needs more privatisation, not less.
Water is a human right, and anything that's a human right should be nationalised. Ultimately, anything that should be a public service should be in public hands.
What is a human right? Do you think food's a human right? Would you nationalise Sainsbury's?
Would you nationalise Sainsbury's? Chat, a second would you nationalise sausages has hit the leftist. When, of course, we already have some level of state provision for food. There is state subsidy given to things such as food charities, right? Like, this is already a thing, but that's not what Zack is talking about. Zack is talking about public services and natural monopolies where not only have market mechanisms broken down, which allows people like Macquarie or other investment firms and private equity firms to asset strip these things because they know the consumers have no choice. They can't go elsewhere because of the state of it's a natural monopoly. This is why, in the vast majority of cases, because public services often than not are natural monopolies, market mechanisms break down and they should be in public hands. And on top of this, if it's a public good and a human right, like, for example, water with poor market feedback, it should be being done for the public good rather than for private profit as well, you know? This is why healthcare should be entirely in the hands of the state, because making money off of healthcare is something that is morally reprehensible. It should be owned by the people who use it at the end of the day. And of course, there is also the problem that in healthcare, you do have an inelastic demand curve, because you will pay anything to not die.
Food.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for making sure that everyone in the country can eat, particularly young people, which is why
would you nationalise
support
food?
free
Policies
school meals.
like this, that, by the way, that cause mass starvation in countries like the Soviet Union.
Zack Polanski wants to bring the Soviet Union to Britain, chat. Get ready for the breadlines as we have water in public hands. And again, Reem Ibrahim is still trying to assume that what he's saying here is nationalise Sainsbury's, which he has not said. He has not said he'll nationalise the sausages. What the fuck is going on?
That's an absurd thing to say.
This is exactly what it is. When the government take control of food, when the government take control of things that are important, they end up absolutely causing ruin.
The water companies are pumping record levels of shit into the rivers. This never happened at all, ever, under the regional water boards. This never happened, right? We're some of the best water in Europe at the time, before privatisation. And now, you've put it in private hands. They've not built a new reservoir since 1992. Out here going, well, when you put the government in control of water, things are terrible. We have the worst water system in the world. No other country looks at what we have done with water privatisation and says that's a good thing. Not even Augusto Pinochet, not even the Americans do what we do with water. It's an insane system. An insane system. And it's not the Soviet Union, Reem, to bring the water industry back into public ownership.
Throughout those industries. Fundamentally, I think food, water, electricity, all of these things are incredibly important, and that's exactly why I don't want the government to take their hands.
Yeah, because electricity privatization has been so good as well, hasn't it? That's worked out well. Not only has it still led to sky-high bills compared to the rest of Europe, for example, where we have some of the highest bills in Europe. On top of this, it's incredibly ecologically damaging because we built loads of gas power stations rather than investing in renewables, because that was what was the most profitable per investment for the private sector.
Point by human right is no matter how poor you are, you should have access to water and clean water. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah. The human.
And again, because it's a natural monopoly, if you have it entirely in private hands, unless you literally fix prices, which is what the regulator has to do, which is why it's pointless having it in private hands if you're just going to fix the prices anyway, just let the state do it at that point. Because otherwise, they would be able to rinse customers dry because you can't not have water. The floor on pricing, if there was no price cap set by the water regulator, would essentially be the same price as buying bottled water in the shop, because that would be our only alternative, because it's a natural monopoly.
Human rights thing I don't understand. I mean, we've all got a human right not to be a victim of crime. We've got a human right, in the end.
Whoa! We have a human right not to be a victim of crime. Imagine, chat. Imagine. Stay with me, chat. Stay with me. Stay with me. Stay with me. Stay with me. Imagine if we had a fully publicly owned institution in place to ensure that crime was minimized by offering a deterrent and some level of rehabilitation for criminals to try and keep society safer. Imagine if we had something like that, but we had it funded by the state. That's a really interesting idea you've got there, Jeremy. I wonder if anything like that has ever been tried ever before in every country in the world in existence.
And life's not like that. It doesn't work like that. Some people are poor.
Well, I think it could be like that. That's why we have a police force, for instance, that is funded by the government. I think services that require people to get about being in society.
I think that the fact of the matter is the government taking control over so many of these industries results in people not being able to make those choices. Food, I think, is actually...
You know what's really interesting? Really interesting, right? So take, for example, electricity. In the 1990s, when British Gas lost their control over things like electricity distribution, where you got your power from, and we had more suppliers entering the market, right? The government literally had to do promotional videos to try and get people to choose a different electricity supplier, because people couldn't be asked. We were sold this dream from the Thatcher government that not only would you get better electricity and power into your home cheaper and more efficient because of the competition driving innovation, you'd also have the most fun experience where you'd get to go on comparethemarket.com and compare all of the suppliers and be able to choose the best one for you, and that'd be a little thing that you could do to make your life better. And nobody wanted that shit. Literally, nobody wanted that. People just want to pay their bloody bills, right? It's why praxeology as an economic ideology is so stupid. This idea, essentially, that you can model the economy based upon every single human within that economy being a totally rational actor that is self-preserving at all times, when the reality is the opposite is true. People actually want the convenience of being able to pay the electricity bill every month and not have to worry about trying to choose a different contract every time, right? I hate having to re-sign up every 18 months to a new bloody broadband deal. Just give me the broadband communism and have done with it, and then I can forget about it. I don't want to have to keep renegotiating basic services like internet, electricity, gas, water. People don't want competition, they don't want choice, and the evidence proves it as such, given that the government literally had to try and force people. It had to beg people and plead with people to engage in some level of competitive pricing. They had to force people to go out there and choose their electricity provider and get them to divest from British Gas because they wanted the market to work and function when it was just not functioning unless the government was intervening to make it function. Which shows you the whole thing is stupid. The electricity market is artificial. We don't have multiple electricity suppliers coming to our homes which we can choose from. We only have the one, and of course it's subject to a price cap anyway. So by economies of scale, the smaller suppliers just die, and they have done over and over and over again. All the small suppliers who couldn't keep up with the rate at which that the bigger suppliers could make profit, they all just collapsed and had to get swallowed by the big six. Even the not-for-profit Robin Hood Energy set up by Nottingham City Council, which was there to try and ensure that they could have a not-for-profit supplier to undercut these people, just couldn't survive because it didn't have the economy of scale that the big suppliers did. And again, this is an economy of scale that they inherit as part of a natural monopoly. There is no reason for this to be in private hands.
A really good example of that. We don't want the government meddling in food, where actually we have pretty good food industry. We've got groceries. People are able to make choices. What I want to see is more free trade. Let's remove tariffs and quotas from Moroccan tomatoes that are being imported to the UK. Why do we have them? It's because basically when we're a member of the EU, we've still kept them on. Let's take actual opportunities from Brexit and repeal
What about the Spanish tomatoes, right? I'm not exactly like a big EU stan. I have my criticisms, but if your argument is we want to have cheap tomatoes by removing trade barriers, probably easier to import them from Spain and Italy, where we had a free trade deal as part of the common market, than have to try and ratify some new trade deal with Morocco. Just a thought, Reem. It's just a thought. Like, I'm at least somewhat amenable to the argument that having a marketized food industry, because the market feedback on that commodity is so strong, right? It really does match the supply demand curve. There is no natural monopoly. Having it marketized is fine. I'm not necessarily calling that an issue. I think having state intervention to ensure everyone has access to food is really important. I believe in the right to food, but fundamentally the distribution and the production of food being marketized is fine. I just wish these were cooperatives, that they were owned by the workers themselves rather than being done as a private venture with an individual capitalist owner, you know? That's an issue that I have. But marketization of this is fine. But the state intervening to ensure that there is at least a strategic reserve that is there to feed people who need it, that's what I believe in. You know, food is a human right. There should be access to food for everybody. But the production, I don't mind it being marketized in the first place.
All of that
Brexit
stuff.
has come up. My goodness, I thought it was coming.
Opportunities from
Brexit
Brexit.
gives
It's quite
us
triggering.
these opportunities. Let's actually go and take hold of them.
The mayor of Lincoln, she said she wants to cut net zero. That's 12,500 jobs that are going to lose from Lincoln just based on
But why
some
not?
kind of
Good.
ideology.
That's a
Why
waste
not
of
cut it,
taxpayer
though?
money.
Can you defend net zero?
Yeah, but I mean,
Lincoln being net zero, what's the point?
well, I mean, the whole point, I think, is to protect our planet, but also it reduces people's bills, and also it creates
No, it
cleaner
does the
air,
complete
it creates
opposite,
more
Zack.
jobs that we can have. And I think ultimately what we
It
need to be doing...
increases people's bills.
And that's just totally wrong. Reem is just completely wrong about net zero increasing bills. She's just totally wrong about that because the strike price of renewables is lower. And if anything, the increased investment into more production is a supply side measure. She should know this. She's a supply side economist. She's a Thatcherite. She's part of the Mises Caucus in her own university when she was at university, right? She must understand supply side economics, right? And the increase the supply, you can make the product cheaper. So we're looking at an increased supply of renewable energy to bring costs down. That's the supply demand curve, Reem. Why are you finding this difficult to understand? And of course, we do have the problem with marginal cost pricing as well, which impacts and distorts the way in which that the market system works. Again, privatization is the problem here, where we have to have these weird pricing systems to try and make a market work where we shouldn't have a market in the first place.
The fact that we're not drilling in the North Sea means that we've got a restricted energy supply, and that absolutely makes
That's
energy more
absurd. If we
expensive.
insulate every single home in Britain that needs it, that would reduce bills
Who's paying
and
for that?
create jobs. We are, because ultimately we're reducing our bill.
Taxpayers are paying.
Well, no, it'll come from fiscal expansion because, again, it's a policy that is being done to reduce consumption. It is an investment in real assets. Those houses being insulated increases and maintains the housing stock. That is not operational expenditure, that is capital expenditure. Therefore, we can justify it through fiscal expansion. And on top of this, the whole point of net zero is that you invest in the supply of renewable energy to replace what we could have done if we'd have done polluting fossil fuel energy, right? We're not constraining supply by increasing the supply in a different place than what she wants.
Paying for this is the thing, and I completely
It's
understand.
spending to invest. It's investing.
Why should the government be forced to do that, and why should taxpayers?
Well, the
be forced
government
to foot
aren't
the
forced to
bill?
do it. We vote in the government, and then the government choose. In the
But
same way that the
this-
Attlee government set up the National Health Service in the
Yeah,
response
and
to the
I think it's
crisis.
absolutely
that
incorrect
arguably hasn't
approach.
gone well.
Well, I'd say the National Health Service hasn't gone well because we've not funded it properly.
Oh
I'd
my
also
God,
argue-
£200 billion a year. We absolutely have funded this.
Again, the same line you hear from these freaks every single time, which is they will tell you a big number, they will use a nominal figure for how much we spent on healthcare, and then try and use that as a way of implying that it's bigger than it is, right? We do spend a lot on healthcare now because in a post-pandemic world, we increased our overall percentage of healthcare spending as a proportion of GDP from below 10% to above 11%, right? We've gone from about 9%, 9.5% to about 11.5%. So just under a 2 percentage point increase from 2020 until today because of the pandemic, right? Between 2010 and 2019, we saw a reduction every single year in NHS spending as a percentage of GDP, whilst countries of a similar size, of a similar level, such as France, were spending the 11% that we are now spending on healthcare. And they had better outcomes than we did during that period, right? We had a reduction every single year, right? Because she won't put in percentage terms, because she won't qualify those numbers by making it as part of a comparison to the rest of the macroeconomy. She's not actually giving you any context for this. All she was trying to scare you with big number bad, rather than the fact that actually we were reducing our healthcare capacity every single year from 2010 till 2019 as a share of the economy, which is the metric that is relevant because the economy grows over time, more people into the economy, etc., etc. And then that led to an increase in waiting lists. Waiting lists were going up before the pandemic, okay? What's important to understand is that the reason why we were so negatively affected by the pandemic is we had no slack in the system. We had no spare capacity because all the capacity had been used up, hence why the waiting lists were going up at that time. So when the pandemic hit, we immediately saw the health system collapse because we didn't have any additional capacity to draw on, any contingency, because all that had been used up with the ballooning waiting lists to ensure maximum efficiency. Healthcare systems are not supposed to be efficient. They are supposed to be redundant. They're supposed to give you room to breathe in case, for example, I don't know, a pandemic happens. That was the problem with the short-termism of austerity, that it allowed us to get to this point where we were running on the thinnest of margin possible, and any amount of disruption to that could have caused catastrophe, and it did. So the idea that we're spending loads on the NHS when we are having to not just make up for all the problems that were caused by the pandemic in the NHS, but all of the problems that were exacerbated by the pandemic from underinvestment beforehand, means we need to be investing double what we should have done to clean up the mess and also get back to where we should have been if we'd invested properly up to 2010. It's super simple. It's super, super simple. And she is deliberately trying to misinform and be disingenuous by doing scare quotes figures about the amount of NHS investment.
The NHS well. Too well,
and we have some of the best health outcomes in the world.
No, we don't. We've got the second highest avoidable mortality rates in all of
Well, you picked
Western
one
Europe.
very specific outcome there that's important.
On basically all available outcomes, the NHS is falling way far behind. We have some...
It was literally number one in the world in 2010. It was literally number one in 2010. Then what happened? Reducing the percentage spend on healthcare of GDP every single year for 9 years. And you expect it to stay number one? Madness, isn't it?
Some of the worst survival rates for cancer.
Where did we start with this? We've ended up with the NHS. We started at Kent Council.
We're talking about the need.
Kent Council.
We're talking about the spending of public services.
Yeah, okay, right.
The dangers of austerity. Ultimately, both the Conservative government and now a Labour government.
What austerity? We're paying the highest tax burden we have since the Second World.
Yes, because we have an ageing society, you fucking clown. Yeah, of course. We have more pensions than we have ever had. We have more sick people than we've ever had, right? This means more spending on pensions, more spending on healthcare. It's happening in every single country in the global north because they're all going through these same demographic trends which have the same demands on the public purse, right? This has to be taken in context. When you look at our other countries, in Western Europe, for example, we are not particularly high in terms of overall tax burden. We just aren't, right? But of course, these people, these propagandist, because she's a propagandist, right? Oh, are you trying to say that my views are bought and paid for? I fucking am, Reem. You are bought and paid for. You are a shill. You are a propagandist hack. You're out there because you want your mates, right? Your mates who pay your little chummy salary for you to steal a living doing propaganda for capital to get access to whatever public assets get sold off when people like you get the keys to number 10. That's what she's there for. She's there to manufacture consent for her paymasters at the IEA to be able to carve up the corpse of what's left of our austerity-ridden country, when eventually those things have to get sold off to deal with the fact that we have budget shortfalls from the tax cuts that she wants to live in a dream world of American levels of taxation that would just lead to societal collapse. Just the worst people in existence.
World War. We are spending huge amounts of money on the government. Are people feeling as though they're seeing public services improve?
So where I agree is let's tax wealth and not income. We are taxing far too much to earned income as opposed to unearned wealth.
So you go door to door? Yeah.
So we could put a
check
1%
on yachts,
tax on
jewellery.
Well, assets of £10 million or more. If you
watch every single wealthy person in the country leave if you do that.
Well, that's just not true because
it is.
Actually,
a millionaire leaves the UK every
I'm talking
45
about assets.
minutes.
Assets can't just move. Duke of Westminster, he owns half of Mayfair. Mayfair can't just move.
But when you take, okay, this is fascinating.
Yeah, because one of the biggest things investing in this country is property. Like, there's a reason why we were able to do what we did to Roman Abramovich as the owner of Chelsea, because Chelsea Football Club can't just fucking move out of London. The huge speculative property industry in this country cannot be moved. The assets are brick and mortar. They can't be picked up and moved and taken with you. And it's access to these assets that's important. That's what the wealth tax is for, really, to try and get these people to sell assets, to reduce those prices, to go back into the system. I think we should have a capital gains tax and a land value tax and an exit tax as well to ensure that we reap the dividends as much as we can from asset holders who are the ones making renter income from the actual productive people in our economy, right? Broadly, it's not about raising revenue for the government. It's about trying to ensure that we incentivize behaviour that allows working and middle class people access to assets again, to be able to get back onto the property ladder, to be able to compete in a world in which the monopolies of this country and the big businesses, the corporations, the ultra rich treat our country like a playground and no one else can get on. That's the whole point, right? But we should be increasing taxable revenue as well. That is also true, because you can't just spend infinitely. Even under modern monetary theory, you would cause inflationary pressures if you just spent without taxation. It's just that the deficit as a number doesn't matter, which is why you shouldn't have fiscal rules, you know? That's what's important. So we should be increasing taxation to ensure we can spend more, but it's not necessary to be able to fund that expenditure through taxation. We need to tax wealth so that the wealthy can sell their assets, so that normal people can have access to those again. And as has been pointed out as well, like if they leave, how are they going to be able to access the UK market again, you know? We are a £1 trillion economy. People don't just want to leave and not have access to those anymore. It's as simple as that.
Fascinating discussion. You go to the Duke of Westminster, you say, we reckon you're worth 100 billion and we want 50 billion off you. And let's say he can't move for various reasons. You take the 50, it's not there anymore. So it's only a one-off hit.
And you use that money to invest to ultimately stimulate our economy.
Where
I'm
does
also
this
talking
end?
about 1% here.
Where does this end? The government already spend more than 50% of GDP. Where does this end? We are already taxing people to the oblivion. Working people are footing the bill. Quite frankly, I want the government to be smaller. I want the government to spend less. And I think that something like Doge should be implemented.
But look at
across the
where
entire
Doge,
country.
they brought Doge in.
Yeah, the same Doge that is killing thousands of children. Like, the cuts to things like USAID literally have caused the increase in the spread of deadly diseases in the global south, right? And I'm not saying that she definitely wants to do the same thing. We don't have the same role globally in terms of aid distribution as the United States does. But literally, what will be cut? The NHS, just like they tried to cut Medicaid in America? What's going to be cut? What, grants for things that keep the fabric of our society together? Doge was a fucking disaster, as you point out in chat. Literally a terrible, terrible, terrible plan that cut important things like scientific funding, new research, university funding, block grants to important supply-side investments to grow the economy. Like, just a unilateral failure in every sense of the word. What does she want to cut? We tried austerity for year after year after year after year. Like £80 billion plus worth of cuts under the Cameron-Osborne government. Did it make the economy grow? Did it increase productivity? Did it make our country a better place to live? No. The answer is unilaterally no. It's a failed idea. It's a totally failed idea. They had to prop up aggregate demand in the economy by doing quantitative easing to put money into bank reserves to try and get literally anybody to spend during a liquidity trap, and it did not work. Like, they had to use central bank money to try and get aggregate demand up because their lack of public spending meant that nobody was able to consume, and that created a sclerotic, non-functioning economy. That's what she wants to do again. There is no justification for it.
Oh, excuse me. If I mention Doge, somebody coughs. They brought Doge in the States. And a number of weird things have happened. They've cut all the foreign aid in the States virtually, and a load of other stuff as well.
And can I add,
good.
we're
You
also
think it's
the
good?
outlier. Across Europe, social democracy is all I'm talking
They
about.
cut forestry stuff.
They have. I mean, I think what's interesting is there needs to be a balance to be struck here. I actually think that when it comes to things like net zero, there are so many places in which we're able to make those particular cuts. I don't think that the approach should be on EDI and net zero in terms of spending cuts, but there absolutely are places we can cut
I know.
spending.
I'll call it a score draw.
I mean, that's because there's nothing to cut there, because the amount that gets spent on EDI and on net zero is minuscule in the grand scheme of government expenditure. It's just, again, something that reform voters are negatively polarised against, as I mentioned in my video the other day about Zia Yusuf, and so they try and claim that this is the source of all government's problems in terms of expenditure, when in reality it's a tiny amount. It's just having a negative polarisation against it allows people to assume that it's the big problem if they hate it already, you know?
Do you worry that as a result of Trump's election, the green thing has just crashed, basically?
I think there's a real danger that, and in this country as well, that reform are really turning against climate action. But we also know that the majority of the public care about the climate crisis. What they don't want to see is that it falls onto the backs of people in terms of the poorest communities.
Understand me, they can't afford to pay anything more than they're paying at the moment.
And I agree with that entirely, which is why I want to see the polluter paying, and the polluters are the multimillionaires and billionaires.
Now, I understand why he's saying this, right? People want to feel like that there is a cost that's being put on somebody else. Again, the polluters, who are the problems that we're trying to mop up by having environmental policy, should be more willing to pay in than regular people who have to deal with the negative externalities of this. In the reality, though, a huge portion of what we spend on things such as renewable energy and moving to a more sustainable economy is not something that you have to pay down through taxation. For example, if you have a government that issues new money to invest in the supply side, which increases the amount of goods and services in the economy, increases the level of the commodities in the economy, that will counteract the new money that's in the system, so supply and demand stays roughly the same, and you're changing the way in which your economy is, of course, first of all, functioning as far as pollution is concerned, but also you're growing the economy because the number of goods and services in the economy that's both being produced and consumed is increasing, right? That's a pro-growth policy. And when you grow the economy, that means increased tax receipts, and so therefore you're able to pay down the money that you borrow to fund these renewable energy projects, right? So it is mostly, as long as you have the necessary resources available, like natural resources and labor, to actually facilitate those additional supplies, that is essentially a free lunch. You can borrow your way into a free lunch. That's always been the case. That's basic Keynesianism. Anything that we can do, we can afford, which is essentially meaning that constraint is real resources and not the ability of the government to be able to spend, you know? So we shouldn't even necessarily be saying that there's somehow a cost that must be paid by somebody for net zero, when in reality, a lot of the things that we'll do are investment and therefore essentially a free lunch for the government. There are some things that will require a change in attitudes and a change in behaviour, but of course we can ameliorate that through, as Zack points out, more taxation on polluters to be able to provide the public with things that mitigate what they may have to go through to be able to adhere to new regulations, for example.
I want to see governments and private business ultimately paying to make sure that we all live in a fairer society.
Why are you shaking your head?
Protecting our environment.
Because they're already paying sky-high taxes. I mean, fundamentally, a millionaire in the UK, every 45 minutes, a millionaire leaves. So I think that we need to be very clear about the fact that the tax burden is far too high. Millions of people across the country are paying extortionate amounts of money. And when we're talking about the very wealthy, I believe this to my core. The government cannot spend money as well as individuals and people can.
I mean, that's just fundamentally not true. That's just fundamentally not true, right? That is, first of all, just something that she's saying out of faith, really, you know? For example, I don't know, if you look at the economy in Norway, where they have a lot more state ownership, looking a little bit better than us, right? If you do anything other than measure with just like broad brush macroeconomic factors and you look at actual quality of life, the Scandinavian countries with far more state intervention and far more state expenditure and state ownership than we have, higher on Human Development Index, higher on the Happiness Index. We have populations that actually want to live in their own countries and feel patriotic, right? Low mortality rates. They just have a better standard of living than every other country in the world. And that's things that the government can spend better than private individuals, or indeed collectives of people, right? You don't even need to have a market economy with private ownership. You can have worker ownership within a market economy, which I support personally, you know, but that's not the government spending money. And I believe that people can also spend money better than government in certain cases. But the idea that that's somehow a unilateral fact is just completely not borne out by the evidence. But again, she's not coming at this from a point of empiricism, from looking at the examples of what we have in reality. She is treating economics like it's a hard science when it isn't. She is taking the precepts from people such as Friedrich Hayek around the nature of people's actions within an economy, again coming from a praxeological basis of people acting personally through whatever is in their own best interests, perfectly rational all the time, which is fundamentally untrue. As anyone who studied behavioural economics will tell you, that's untrue. You can only come to the conclusion that governments spend money badly because of all of these different things about central planning and the criticisms that Hayek gives. And it is pure ideology, is what she's saying here.
It's pure ideology.
Pure ideology. That's all it is. When there are plenty of examples of government spending money better than the private sector across the world throughout history.
When it comes to things like the environment, I'm a climate optimist. I think we will solve climate change through technological advancements. You know who's done more for climate change?
Literally. You know what I have to deal with the climate crisis? I have blind faith. What's that? There are methods that already work that we could be implementing 20 years ago, and we've not done it because of vested interest in the private sector. I'm sure that if we just allow the private sector to do things, again, when things such as pollution are not in the interest of private businesses to care about because it's a negative externality, it's not part of the market transaction, and she knows this. She knows it's not part of the market transaction. She knows that under her perfect economic system, under an anarcho-capitalist system, because she is one, the only heuristic that would tell you whether the economy is good or not is, does the market clear? Is the market operating at maximum efficiency? And if you take negative externalities into account, that impacts efficiency, it impacts the market clearing. Her own ideology proves that to be completely untrue. It proves that to be completely untrue. Who's going to put in the innovation into building something that is potentially more expensive but would be better for the environment? They wouldn't do it because it would cost them money. It would not be in the personal, rational interest of the private individuals at that time. Her own ideology is debunking this point.
Say
saving
Elon
the
Musk.
environment. Elon Musk.
We don't need technological advancements. If we want carbon capture, we can just plant some trees. That's probably the best way. Is a nature-based solution. When you look at the rich list, the top 5 people, the top 5 billionaires own more wealth than the bottom 50% of this country.
So what?
The inequality is so
Does that matter, though?
Why does
it really
inequality
matters? Because I think that bothers people, that those people aren't working for that wealth. That wealth is happening while they sleep. That wealth has gone back
That is
from
exactly
generations.
how a market.
It is stolen from the surplus value of the working class. Literally, it is stolen from the value of the working class, right? As simple as that. What's interesting as well is that if you were actually a capitalist, like a liberal capitalist rather than a anarcho-capitalist weirdo, you would have read any Adam Smith and understand that the free market in Adam Smith terms is markets that are free from rent. The freedom of a market is to be free from rent, right? And the Smithian capitalism, all profits are reinvested. Profit is bad under a Smithian capitalist system. You reinvest profits to maximize production to increase both productivity and prosperity, right? I find flaws with this in terms of political economy, but I understand the rationale. But that's not what she's saying here. She's saying things like, well, these people can make money in their sleep because that's how capitalism works. You shouldn't be making rent. No one should be making rent. No one should be making rent in a properly functioning economy because it is money that is not being worked for. It is not productive. It's as simple as that. People who turn money into money are not contributing anything positive to society. But of course, under an anarcho-capitalist framework, there is no such thing as society. There is no burden to be placed on somebody to actually contribute to society. They should be able to just do whatever they want in their own interest and fuck everybody else, fuck the planet, fuck everything. And that's why she can only say, well, I hope technology solves it, because it would undermine her own ideology to admit that the negative externalities might impact, for example, future profits if, I don't know, the planetary ecosystem collapses.
And it's a market that is broken and is...
And it doesn't work. It literally doesn't work.
Creating a huge social contract that's broken. It's not about jealousy, it's about fairness.
But what is fair?
I mean, it's not about fairness, it's about utility. It's about marginal utility, right? What does a billionaire, a multiple billionaire, care for doubling their wealth, right? If you double your wealth from 10 billion to 20 billion, how does that change how you approach society? How does it change your quality of life? There is a minuscule change to your quality of life, right? If you are somebody who has £30,000 and you double that to £60,000, that's an incredible increase in your standard of living, right? The marginal utility of the rich increasing their wealth is far, far lower than the bottom 50% increasing their wealth. So it's not about fairness, necessarily, because fairness means everything to different people. Fairness means different things to everybody, right? People have their own understanding of what fairness means. Because if you asked Reem Ibrahim, she would say, it's unfair, you are taxing people, money that in her mind, under her ideology, they have earned, to pay for people who haven't earned it themselves because they've not operated functionally within the market as she would want them to, right? So appealing to her on grounds of fairness isn't going to work. You have to make a utilitarian argument. And the utilitarian argument is, well, why should rich people care about getting wealthier? They already have everything they need. When there are people out there which money could be better spent to increase their quality of life significantly more than that same money would increase the quality of life for the already rich. The whole point is about utility. It's about effective utility of how we use money in society. Because unless your only heuristic for how you approach the economy that you create in your society is, does the market clear, you will end up with fabulously wealthy billionaires and slaves. And if you want an example of what happens when you take that approach to creating your economy, look at Dubai. That's where we're headed. That's where this country and this economy is headed if people like Reem Ibrahim are in control. A semi-feudal, a neo-feudal state of fabulously wealthy rentier and capitalists, slaves. That's literally it.
I would like to see the poorest people in society wealthier. I don't care that there are wealthy people that own huge amounts of wealth.
Well, this is the issue. If somebody very wealthy moves to this country, do the three of us get poorer?
Because no, we get wealthier.
Yes, you do get poorer. They have far more ability to impact the market than you do. Someone who's incredibly rich has a distorting effect on the market. Your access to things such as assets, for example, is curtailed because you are competing with people with more money. The more fabulously wealthy people you have in your society, the more that they will be able to outcompete the poor for assets. That's what's been happening for the last 46 years. That's what's been happening. Asset prices have spiraled out of control, and the percentage of the country that is working or middle class that has ownership of this has dwindled as the super rich have bought them up, right? Sure, we get cheap TVs and iPhones, but houses are more expensive. Access to any asset is much more expensive than it used to be.
They spend more. They
No,
spend
but we
in
see
businesses.
this. We see their mansion, and we think we'll never be able to afford that.
Well, they don't spend. They invest, right? They buy assets. They speculate. And because we have an economy where it's such an easy return on buying up these assets, because the competition between asset holders continues to grow as they fabulously increase their wealth, means there is no incentive to invest in productive businesses. There's no incentive to invest in something that actually increases the productive capacity of society and makes life better for everybody. Because I'm all for productive investment. I'm all for innovation. I'm all for increasing productivity. I think that's good, and I think productivity increases as long as you have a fair economy, gets filtered down to working class people, right? As long as you have the economy and the labour market all set up in the way so that you can have maximised gains for everybody in society, productivity increases from productive investment is a good thing. But we do not have productive investment because we do not have the framework of an economy that helps incentivise it. We have an economy that incentivises increasing speculation on assets. And what she wants will make it worse. What she wants will make it even worse. And again, the way you avoid the political economy from creating this group of fabulously wealthy people who outcompete others is to get rid of the private ownership of means of production. It is to replace private ownership with collective ownership, whether it be through the state, whether it be through cooperatives. That is how you ensure that those gains of productivity get spread between everybody, rather than all going up into the pockets of the few and then being used to speculate on assets, rather than trickling down. Because, of course, these tax cuts, for example, and these private ownership models we've had since 1979 have not filtered down. It's shown provably that trickle-down economics has failed.
So I think this is the point. People think that the amount of wealth is fixed. The amount of wealth is fixed, and therefore, if somebody else is wealthy, that means I can't be. And that's simply not true.
Okay.
Somebody else being wealthy in the UK means that you're also able to get wealthy. What we want is a growth.
That's just not true. That's just not true. Like, it's not unreasonable to say that the overall level of wealth is not fixed. That is true. You can grow the pie, for example. But in the years we've had all of this growth since 1979, which hasn't been as high as the aggregate growth from 1945 to 1979, but regardless, if we don't ensure by having a fair economic system that those gains you have in, for example, the overall level of wealth in the country goes broadly to everybody, you can have the system where we have now, where any little gains that do happen go into the hands of the super rich, because we have things like a flexible labour market, which she wants. We have things such as low tax on the rich, like she wants. We used to have a 90% tax on the rich in this country, which not only helped ensure that gains were distributed fairly, it ensured that people couldn't have access to a huge amount of capital to create a rentier economy like we have now.
Growing economy so the poorest in society feel the benefits of economic growth, job opportunities, businesses, real wage increases.
This sounds like
She cannot elucidate on how those increases in wealth would actually go through into higher wages and better standards of living for everybody. She can't elucidate how that would happen because it has not happened under the model that she wanted since 1979.
trickle-down economics, and I think it's failed over and over
not
again.
trickle-down economics,
And it's been demonstrated to
freedom.
fail.
At what point?
But it's
It's freedom. Oh, the freedom to extract wealth through rentier capitalism. Oh, wow. I'm looking forward to being so free to choose which landlord I pay rent to choose which platform capitalism I subscribe to, and to choose which gig economy job that I sell my labour to for a fraction of what they actually produce in terms of value. Brilliant. Sounds incredibly free, Reem.
not freedom if
One
you
more
can't
thing.
heat your home, eat, or make sure that your kids are able to get to school because you can't afford
The
the public
one
transport.
driver, the one thing in the world that has reduced poverty rates is capitalism. It
Okay.
is freedom.
All
It
right.
is free exchange.
Absolutely.
The country in the world that's lifted the most people out of poverty is the People's Republic of China, the one run by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, to be fair, it is a capitalist country, let's be real, right? Just because it's run by a Communist Party doesn't make it not capitalist, right? But it's the very least state capitalist, right? It is the very least a state capitalist country where they actually have much better reinvestment and increasing productivity because of the fact that there's some level of state direction of the economy that has prevented the creation of a rentier economy, which is what we have here in the West.
Liz Truss. I kept seeing this headline. I thought, what is going on? It says she's flogging whiskey for an ex-con in Scunthorpe. Maybe this is one where we don't even want to ask what the headline is about. Does the text justify the headline
I
here?
think it does. She said she wasn't being paid for this as well, which I think is a bit bizarre. So yeah, Liz Truss, she was filmed with a video with a bare knuckle fighter jailed for, GBH, which is pretty
Oh dear.
awful.
Oh my god, that guy's teeth, it looks like the Viz Comics meme of the guy with the train ticket in his mouth.
Knuckle fighter jailed for...
Literally, he's the guy. It's the same thing. I knew I recognised him from somewhere.
Oh dear.
Awful.
Oh,
My God, what is she doing?
Oh dear.
This is your PM, Reem. She was anointed into the position and given her brief by the organisation that you are a spokesperson for. This is your doing. Are you happy that you've inflicted this upon society, Reem?
He attacked a man of 78 in a bar and has links to gangsters.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Truss said she either doesn't understand the implications or doesn't care. That was a
Well, yeah, she's just a rational actor promoting her own individual interests within a free market, Reem. Do you hate freedom or something? Do you oppose free exchange?
How did she become Prime Minister?
I think that's exactly it. I think, Liz Truss was not an aberration. She was the natural extension, I'm really going to set off Reem now, of free market ideology
No, she
and
wasn't.
neoliberalism.
It's true, actually. That's a good point that Zack makes. You're looking for the most free market person in the country who's wanted to do exactly what you want, and you've got the sort of wacko person there.
She is a bit mental. I mean, my God. I
know you didn't support her, did you? Your colleague Mark Littlewood did, though.
He did, yes. I think it was what's interesting actually is the broader approach. So we absolutely supported, free market perspectives, and I think Liz Truss, at least at the beginning, seemed as though she wanted that. But then she implemented the energy price guarantee. She wants to cut taxes without cutting spending, and that's something that the free market approach is absolutely against. You cannot put the government in debt, and fundamentally that's where everything went wrong.
There is a lot of misconceptions about what happened during the mini budget period, right? In that people's prevailing understanding is that she cut a bunch of taxes, the markets didn't like it, economy blows up, big sads. The nuance around this is interesting. So I want people to understand the bond market vigilantes aren't seers. They're not ideologically motivated. If you give them a story, if you let them know the method to why you are doing fiscal policy, they will understand what your plan is and what you're doing. So, for example, John McDonnell of the Labour Party, in the run-up to the 2017 election, went to the markets and said, look, this is what we're going to be borrowing money for. This is how we're going to pay down those bonds. This is how we're going to maintain fiscal stability, because it's going into investment. It's going to grow the economy. We'll pay down those bonds with the increased growth and state ownership that we'll get from them. Perfect story to tell, perfectly showing to the markets how they'll be able to ensure that they make a return on the bonds that they buy at auction. Not a problem, right? So that'll be a fiscal expansionary policy, which means the government will be spending more than it was taxing, and the bond markets wouldn't have a problem with that. With the mini budget, it was announced over a weekend when the markets were closed. They didn't do a brief. They didn't have an OBR report. They didn't have any plan or documentation of how these tax cuts were supposed to spur a growing economy into paying themselves down through the Laffer curve or whatever. And so when she made the mini budget, without any kind of scrutiny, that's when the bond market reacted. The bond market reacted really, really badly because there was no story, there was no plan, there was no way of showing to the bond vigilantes what the long-term prospects of the economy would look like under this new fiscal model. So, of course, it being done overnight with no warning immediately skyrocketed bond yields. And the reality of the Liz Truss experiment was that the people who were negatively affected were mortgage holders, because interest rates had to go up to maintain sterling levels so that we didn't see a collapse in the value of the currency compared to other currencies around the world. That's why interest rates spiked then. And on top of this, the bond yield increase that spiked hugely overnight caused a bunch of pension funds who invested in things called liability-driven investments to get margin called, because these were financial instruments that take the value from bonds. And so when the bond yield increases, the value of the bond drops, meaning that the value that the pension funds hold is lower based upon what their liabilities are. So they got margin called, which meant that the Bank of England had to do an emergency bond buying program to ensure solvency of pension funds. And that was only because, very specifically, the bond yield spiked overnight. If they'd have just grown slowly, like they have done since, the pension funds can change their positions. The unique problem with the Liz Truss is it all happened at once. It all happened at once overnight, when in reality, now I don't advocate for tax cuts, I don't think they're good, but the reality is that what she really proved is that modern monetary theory is right, that the government can just go, oh, okay, well, something's gone wrong with the economy, it's going to buy a bunch of bonds. That's what they did. They just bought some bonds, created £60 million or whatever it was, out of nowhere, to emergency buy bonds from pension funds to keep them afloat, and the economy didn't collapse. We just had higher interest rates and people's pension provision dropped, which is bad. That's why she shouldn't have done it. But the idea that this crashed the economy is really kind of up for debate. But the issue is that there was no plan on how this was going to deliver growth. And the reality is that it wouldn't have given growth. Because fundamentally, right, if you borrow to invest, which is what me and Zack are saying, it's what Jeremy Corbyn was saying, it's what John McDonnell was saying, you can say this is a new productive investment, it's going to increase supply, that's going to introduce more commodities into the economy, increase demand, increase supply, economic growth. Simple as that. Very easy story to tell the bond markets that growing economy will pay down the interest on those bonds. If you cut taxes, and they specifically cut the taxes for the wealthiest, can you guarantee that's going to get invested? Can you guarantee that's going to lead to more productivity and higher growth? Of course you can't. It's going to get sent off to a bank account in the Cayman Islands. That's not going to be productive. That's not going to grow the economy. And in the long term, that would damage the fiscal credibility of the government. But it's not just she did some tax cuts and it were bad. She did an energy price guarantee and that was bad, right? You can do these things if you tell a story. But unfortunately, she didn't have one. And there was no plausible reality in which her plan would have worked. So I think there's some nuance to the Liz Truss story that people miss. But when the right criticise her, they just say, oh, well, energy price guarantee ruined everything. Well, we still did the energy price guarantee, mostly funded through borrowing, after Jeremy Hunt reversed the mini-budget. And the economy didn't collapse, did it? Oh, and this has been pointed out in chat as well, that she was also kind of screwed over by the fact that the Bank of England had started their quantitative tightening programme like the day before. But of course, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, like Kwasi Kwarteng, it is your fucking job to know when the Bank of England has started QT. It is your job to know if the pension funds can't deal with a spark in bond yields because you've been frivolous with the way in which that you have taken your fiscal event, right? It is your job to know whether or not the pension funds will stay solvent if bond yields increase. He didn't know that. He didn't know QT had started. He didn't know anything. These people are fucking idiots, right? But the reality isn't just she increased expenditure and dropped taxes and this was terrible. You know, it's far more complex than this.
This sounds like Nigel Farage with Brexit. The problem is always not Brexit. You just didn't do Brexit properly.
Well, I agree with that.
It sounds like you just didn't do free market ideology properly.
Well, no, but it hasn't. I mean, it literally hasn't been implemented. The government spends, I've said this earlier, it's literally the government spends 50% of GDP. Half the economy
quite small compared to the rest of Europe.
Half the economy is the
Yes, it's small compared to the rest of Europe. Zack is absolutely correct.
State. I think people are sick of it. I think people are sick of the fact that the government are misspending their money, wasting it on silly things.
The thing is, the irony is this just isn't true. In basically every single sector, the people want the government to spend more money. They just want to get taxed from other people. And I think that's a problem, right? Is that we need to, of course, talk about the fact that we absolutely need to tax the rich. We do need to tax the rich more for a whole host of reasons. That should happen, right? But the idea that we can only tax the rich and not try and get buy-in for other people has kind of created a position where people think that the only people who pay taxes are the other people, right? That's a problem that we have, is that people believe that it's up to somebody else to pay tax. And we want to ensure that people understand that taxation is part of the social contract. And whilst you can tell the story that the super rich have not bought into that social contract, so should be the prime contributors when we do change tax policy, I think that ensuring that people understand that they probably should contribute a little bit more tax, especially middle class people, as long as the rich are contributing more and a bigger percentage, then I think you can sell that idea to people, right? But we need to get out of the kind of neoliberal mindset that responsibilities are other people's problems. Why I think we need to look at changing taxings that are paid elsewhere as well.
The government spends money. What that's doing is money in our public services that's going to all of us. It's not like
people feel? Does anybody feel as though public services are improving?
No, and that's because we're not spending properly.
Well, it may be because we're getting older.
What does not spending properly look like? We're spending so much money. What does not spending properly look like?
But it's just not true. We're spending so much money, and I think everyone knows that's true.
We're spending so much money.
We've got buses that don't run. We've got water companies.
Where's the money going? I don't know where the money's going because we are spending so much money. But as you say.
He's even buying into that idea we're spending so much money when it's just not true. Compared to our European partners of similar size, of similar economies, we are actually middle of the pack in terms of state expenditure. It's just not true that we're spending so much money. It's just not true. And even then, I do agree we're spending some money badly on things like private sector contracts for public sector investment, right? We are wasting money on private sector subcontractors. We are wasting money on topping up shitty wages and sky-high rents through failure of statecraft up until this point because we've expected the market to fix these externalities and it hasn't. We had 14 years of austerity. We sold off things that were revenue generating for the government, like British Petroleum, for example, like our oil reserves, which could have created a sovereign wealth fund like Norway did, right? Like, there are so many poor decisions that have been taken up to this point. And whilst I think that there are certain things you could change in the way the government spends money, it's still not spending enough to have a proper public sector to incentivize a good, productive, growing economy like we have in other countries on the continent, for example. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.